modified aspect of personality and consolidate it more in order to develop a healthy sense of self. Okay, so in order to reach, to be able to cultivate the insight into non-self, one first needs a healthy and well-developed sense of self. And then when one overcomes the idea of the atta, the self spoken of in Buddhism, then one becomes free from self in the healthy or wholesome way. I saw a hand floating. Neil? Take
the previous one of the questions from online got me thinking. If the Buddha actually never said there is no self,
yeah,
but instead encouraged one not to see the aggregates as self,
yeah.
Is it possible that he meant to say these are not self, but something else is?
No, because he also repeatedly rejects somebody's attempt to posit a self outside or beyond the aggregates. I think what I would say is that one can infer from things that the Buddha said that he doesn't accept the idea of a metaphysical self at all. I think Andrea wants to say something.
Thanks for bringing that up, because there's like a whole internet debate, just raging debate on that. And you have people who are hysterical, really hysterical in their arguments. And they use that to even further posit the idea of self by saying, well, he never said that.
Yeah.
So I wanted you to really clarify that, so thanks, Neil.
Yeah,
it's really important.
I keep away from internet debates on
No, but I mean, this is going to get on the internet. That's important, and I wanted you to go over that a bit further, because I could just see, well, maybe one said it.
Yeah, wow.
And everybody knows
I have
there's
to
the
be
canon.
extremely careful of everything I say here.
Well, no, but then when you come up with a rejoinder, because they just go nutters over that. So ergo, ipso facto, there must be a soul or an atma. And,
yeah.
But next is a great rebirth debate, but that's not for this.
I think
Candy,
I saw something.
maybe you take the microphone. You pass it down.
I think I saw a Sutta which talks about a person asks the Buddha if there is a self,
Yeah.
and the Buddha gave him the answer. A Sutta about.
And the Buddha gave him the answer.
They gave him the answer like, I forgot where I saw it, but it's like, he taught everything like 5 aggregates. How can you still think there is a self? It's something like that. I'm not sure.
Oh, maybe.
I do saw something like that.
I'm not sure. I have to think which. I have to see which sutta that is. But there is a sutta where one wanderer comes to the Buddha. His name is Vajjagota, and he asks the Buddha, "Is there a self, Master Gotama?" And then the Buddha remains silent. Then Vajjagota says, "Is it the case then that there is no self?" And again the Buddha remains silent.
Yeah,
Then this wanderer walks away, and then Ananda asks the Buddha, "Why did you remain silent in both cases?" Then the Buddha said that, maybe this is what you're thinking of, if I said that there is a self, would that be consistent with my teaching that all phenomena are non-self? So then Ananda says, that's the case, it would have been inconsistent. And then the Buddha says, if I taught that there is no self, then this wanderer is already very confused, and so he would have wondered, before I had a self, and now the teacher Gotama says I have no self.
Yeah, I saw the sutta too.
So is that the one you were thinking of?
I don't think they are the same one.
Okay, I'll try to think of the one.
I'll try to figure it out.
Okay.
Is she thinking of the fisherman one? No.
That doesn't really speak so much about the five aggregates. That's more to reject the idea that it's the same self that wanders on from life to life.
If I can just make a comment, I just think a lot of this debate, oh my God, it's not really even a proper question to ask if there's a self, because it just further enforces the idea of self. It's besides the point of the Buddha-dhamma.
Yeah.
Trying to teach.
Yeah.
Just get people totally away, because now you're seeking to just attach onto an idea of self. We'll see.
Yeah. Either an idea of self, or else there'll be those who militantly take up the idea there is no self.
And either way, because they don't get it, but they're either being eternalists or nihilists. They're actually going down this path, because you either think there is a self, or you think there is, something to be got rid of. Either way, you're putting in something, and that's totally against the point of the Buddhist dhamma.
Yeah. So it seems to me the Buddha, his teaching is designed to eliminate, it's actually the clinging to things as being I, mine, and myself. And so what is it that we cling to? Basically the five aggregates are also external things. So the Buddha says, see all dhammas, all phenomena.
Our condition.
Excuse me?
Our condition.
Yeah. So see all phenomena, either the five aggregates or external things, see them as not mine, not I, not myself. And when one develops that insight, it removes the clinging. And so that's the cure that the Buddha is aiming at, is the removal of the clinging.
But I think one of the problems is, especially in Western countries, they don't really teach by the Socratic method anymore. Do you know what I'm saying? We want to be spoon-fed. We want to be told what is. And he didn't teach that way. He taught in a negative fashion to get people to think to get people to think for themselves. And that's a problem, because especially in Western culture, well, what is it? What's the answer?
Yeah.
He didn't teach like that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Somebody, I think Neil has a question.
Yeah, I was just going to add that.
Take the microphone.
I was just going to add that there was an implication in how you answered that question that I think was important, which is that the Buddha didn't treat it philosophically. There is or is not a self. He treated it very practically.
Exactly.
And I have a teacher who always says, just sit on the cushion and as you look at the five aggregates, see if you can find a self. If you can, let me know. And so basically that's what he's doing. He's just, telling us to see for ourselves if we can look inside of this being and find that kernel of a self.
Okay, David, again, take the microphone.
I know next to nothing about all of this because I'm just a very beginner. But I'm wondering if all of this is somehow, it sounds to me anyway, and probably my misperception, this all begins to sound very metaphorical. Even the idea of a self sounds as if he's talking about something in some metaphorical kind of way rather than some literal kind of way. I mean, we're talking about all of this in a very literal sense. There is a self, like he was talking about a self. Perhaps he was talking about something somewhat different. I don't know what that would be, but it doesn't sound as as if it's something that's literal, that exists in the way that he was talking about it.
Well,
I'm not making myself clear.
Unless you...
I mean, there is a self, there isn't a self. It goes back and forth,
Well, that is sort of the questions, or one of the questions that was discussed and debated amongst all of the thinkers and religious teachers in the Buddha's time. And then the Buddha spoke about this whole debate of there is a self, there isn't a self. He calls it like the wilderness of views, the desert of views, the thicket of views. But the idea of, for people who have the idea of self, including those on the internet who say there is no self, you idiot.
Well, David Hume also agreed that wasn't any experience of the self. So
Yeah.
if I examine my own experience, what I
Yeah.
see is bundles of ideas at two different types.
Yeah.
One external, large, clear, forceful ones, and
Yeah.
faint, imaginary, memory ones, right?
Yeah.
And we said, but you don't experience a self, but that means that the self is not experienced. That's not quite the same thing as saying that the self doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because you can say, okay, so what the self is the thing that does the experiencing.
Yeah.
In other words,
Yeah.
right? That is that you don't have to say, well, I experience or I don't experience the thing that does the experiencing. That you don't have to make that decision. There are some things which we acknowledge exist
Yeah.
without experiencing them. In the way, for instance, like mathematics and such, like the
Yeah.
rules of logic. You don't have to think that you're going to experience a rule of logic in order to be forced logically to acknowledge that it exists. And so the problem there is, I think, the idea of existence. That is, the assumption is that that existence is only something which one experiences. And so, you don't always use that idea of existence. Right? That is, there are contexts in which you don't. For instance, in logic and mathematics and different areas of philosophy. Right?
Yeah.
And so what we're saying is the Buddha is not necessarily claiming either that self exists or that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
What he seems to be claiming, or closest to claiming, is that it's not experienced. That's a little different from the claim that it doesn't exist, given that existence has a number of different meanings.
And that's a good point. In fact, there's a statement that's in Sutta number 22. This is about as close as one could find to a denial of the self in the Buddha's teaching. But it's not phrased in terms of existence, but in terms of what is found or apprehended. Let me see if I can get the page. Okay, this is on page 232. It's Sutta number 22, paragraph number 25. Okay, the Buddha is speaking to a monk, and he says, or to the monks, and he says, "Bhikkhus, there being a self, would there be for me what belongs to a self?" In other words, if there is a self, then there's something which belongs to a self. That would be if I posit a self, then we could say the 5 aggregates belong to the self, or external things literally belong to the self. Okay, so the monk says yes. Then the Buddha says, or else, if there is what belongs to a self, then would there be for me a self? So yes. So in other words, self and what belongs to a self are interdependent notions. Then he says, since a self and what belongs to a self are not apprehended or not found as true and established, then this standpoint for views, namely that which is the self is the world, after death I shall be permanent, everlasting, eternal, and so on, doesn't that become an utterly and completely foolish teaching? Okay, so the point that I want to make here is that the Buddha doesn't quite say that since a self and what belongs to a self doesn't exist, he just puts aside the question of existence, and he says that a self and what belongs to a self are not apprehended, they're not discovered, not found as true and established. So then that becomes a reason for putting aside all views of self. Okay.
Sorry, I just want to ask one more question.
Yeah.
Very often, we talk about somebody, very often a good person, as being selfless.
Okay.
What does that mean in reference to, in regard to what the Buddha is talking about?
Okay, we speak about a person in ordinary language as being selfless.
Yes.
I would say that in the case that that person has a very attenuated sense of the ego self in the negative sense, that the person is willing to do things for the sake of others, very helpful, very generous, self-sacrificing. We could say this person has a very highly developed sense of empathy with others. And so what I would say is that a person like that, who has a character like that, would have a very strong basis for developing the insight into selflessness. So it doesn't necessarily mean that such a person has already reached that insight. But it's, say, they're working along on parallel lines, but parallel lines that could meet at a certain point in the future. And then, of course, if a person overcomes the sense of self through insight, then that person will be spontaneously selfless in their behavior. Okay, I just want to take the last internet question, then we'll disband for lunchtime. Okay, the question says, some part of karma is very hard to explain without some sort of carrier, something to carry that karma. Yeah, this was a question, in fact, that the Buddhist schools face, because the Buddha doesn't deal with that question explicitly. Oh, I see, this is a continuation. Is there a carrier of karma? Is the carrier a permanent entity? What is the nature of this carrier from life to life? Let me just say that different Buddhist schools began to speculate over this question. What is it that carries the karma? And probably the dominant view is that there's no entity that carries the karma from moment to moment and from life to life. But there's a kind of stream or sequence of momentary acts of consciousness, and the stream of karma is just like a collection of potentials within that stream of consciousness, which is passed on from moment to moment within the stream of consciousness. Then when the right conditions come together, then the karma brings its results. But there's no entity which is the carrier of the karma. But other schools weren't satisfied with that, and some posited a kind of consciousness, it's called the Alaya Vijnana, which is, again, it's a stream rather than a lasting entity, but it's a stream that continues on preserving its identity from life to life, and it carries the seeds of karma. Okay, this is just a continuation of the question. Okay, I think we'll end now, and we will have a class again next Saturday, the 29th, and we'll try to finish the sutta the next week. I thought to myself this morning, well, I should be able to finish the sutta today. But I think it's important to discuss the questions that arise from this passage. Okay, we'll end with the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits of listening to the Dhamma, teaching the Dhamma. We share them with the Devas, Bhutas or fierce spirits, and other sentient beings. Akasata Chabhumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantam Anumodipa Chirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chabhumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantam Anumodipa Chirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chabhumata Deva Nagam Edika Punyantang Anumoditva Shiram Rakantu Manparam Etavatacha Amhehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacha Amhehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Bhudanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacha Amhehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Sadanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadaya Vichihitato Etantare Satakaya Papana Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanino Tukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibhuti. We stand up.